Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I actually wanted to step away from the usual music reviews for one quick moment to talk about an issue that's been bothering me a lot lately and I think has been going underreported. I am not a journalist, so apologies if I get some things wrong, but I feel this needs to be discussed anyway. So, we need to talk about Bandcamp. Bandcamp is probably my favorite site to use on the internet. It is the platform on which I make 99% of my music purchases, since it's easily the most effective major music platform that independent artists can use to actually get paid. Anytime I review an album and the artist in question has a Bandcamp page, I will always link the Bandcamp page in the description over any of the other major streaming services. It's also the main site I use for distributing my own original music as 256pi, including several different releases which are currently only available there and not on any of the big streaming services. It's even easily the most common app I use on my phone to listen to music. I use Bandcamp almost literally every day as part of running this very channel. Much of my Some Stuff I Missed roundups are just me going through various projects their Bandcamp daily editorial staff highlights. And this site has had every opportunity to screw over the artists on their platform, considering it's gone through not one, but two major corporate buyouts. First to Epic Games, and then to Songtradr. And they even fell victim to union busting, which cut their entire staff in half shortly after that second buyout. But in spite of all that, it still functions almost the exact same way it always has, even back in the days when they ran independently and weren't owned by a corporation. Still profitable enough to be healthy on their own merits, to my knowledge, but in a way that the artists themselves can actually profit from, unlike any major streaming platform. It's pretty much the last major safe haven left for independent artists to distribute their music on the internet. But there's been a bit of a concerning development behind the scenes on Bandcamp lately. So, about a month ago, it was pointed out to me that buried in the weeds of Bandcamp's help section, they outlined a plan that they were rolling out for a supposed new payment system. Now, up to this point, Bandcamp has used PayPal to process the vast majority of payments. As of recording this video, that's the only option to process payments that I personally have available in the settings of my own Bandcamp page. But working with PayPal apparently had its problems, including delays and processing fees that artists would have to deal with. So Bandcamp have decided to start rolling out support for a different payment processor, Stripe, which they have already utilized for certain specific functionalities in the site, like artist subscriptions and stuff. According to them, Stripe will be able to process Bandcamp payments more quickly and more easily, with lower fees that will allow for a greater revenue share for the artists themselves, which sounds good on paper. And let's also make it clear, I really don't think their motivations for incorporating such a change is, for their own bottom line. Because, Bandcamp themselves are not the ones who are paying for PayPal's processing fees. Those are taken out of the artist's check. For example, under the current system, if someone buys one of my albums for $1 and it's not Bandcamp Friday, I will get back 73 cents. The missing 27 cents there goes towards both Bandcamp's cut, which is 15%, as well as PayPal's processing fee, which comprises the remaining 12 cents. So, if they want to switch over to a different payment processor that has lower fees, or according to Bandcamp, no fees in some cases, Bandcamp wouldn't be making any more money than they would otherwise, to my knowledge, and that would in fact be more of a benefit to the artists in theory. I can respect the intentions behind this plan. However, the problem is that they're not simply planning to introduce an option to use Stripe behind the scenes. They're planning for Stripe to outright replace PayPal altogether and for PayPal to no longer become an option for processing payments at all. At least within the specific territories where Stripe is available. PayPal would still be used in territories that Stripe does not service. At the time I first saw this, I did make a small stink about it on Blue Sky and Twitter, although at the time, considering the plan was A, buried in their help page, B, Bandcamp had seemingly not contacted anyone about moving forward with this, C, the page they tried to link people to for more details about their plan was broken at the time, and D, there was no option for Stripe integration within my own page's settings, and there still isn't. I thought at the time, well, this plan must not be completely finalized. Perhaps they may rethink the way they're going about it. However, I have since recently seen reports of people getting actual emails from Bandcamp with instructions on how to change to this new payment system, and the page with further details on how they're planning to integrate it is functional again. So it does seem like the steps have begun towards actually making this transition, and that was what motivated me to make this video. Now, seeing this possible development for the first time a few months ago raised all of the red flags for many different reasons, not the least of which is the fact that Stripe, the payment processor that Bandcamp wants everyone to use, has been under pretty heavy fire lately thanks to its very direct involvement in the widespread throttling of a different major user-driven platform, the equivalent of Bandcamp for independently released video games, Itchio. Perhaps you may have already heard about this recently, considering it's been a pretty major story, but for those not already in the know, Itchio was pressured by multiple major payment processors, including MasterCard, Visa, and yes, Stripe, to de-index and delist any and every game uploaded to their site, which was marked as 18+ or not safe for work. This move was super abrupt and super widespread. Hundreds of games disappeared from Itchio overnight. And of course, this very disproportionately affected LGBTQ creators. Even a couple of creators who weren't even making any kind of 18+ content at all. The creator of Itchio has gone on record naming Stripe directly as one of the biggest pressure points whose direct influence all but forced them to make such a sweeping and damaging decision. Apparently, this whole campaign from payment processors also came at the behest of a small but vocal Australian right-wing activist group called Collective Shout, who in the past have gone as far as to decry AAA games like Detroit Become Human and GTA 5 for their depictions of violence against women, and who published multiple open letters to these payment processors to shut down 18+ material. To which the payment processors seemed all too happy to bend over for, leading to the messy situation we find ourselves in now. So yeah, I think you can imagine why I found the idea of Bandcamp supposedly pivoting to exclusively using Stripe to be somewhat alarming. Now, also to be clear, PayPal, the payment processor that Bandcamp already use, their hands are far from clean either. In fact, they're also direct contributors to this ongoing censorship campaign, and have long held a policy that if they detect you have used their services for any kind of not safe for work transaction, then your entire account will be shut down. Also, I believe that if your PayPal account shuts down, then PayPal gets to keep the money that you had in your account, so yeah, they're at least equally as bad. But Stripe are no improvement in that regard, and have been the most visible in their draconian policies lately. I have seen reports of Stripe shutting down someone's account purely because they used it to sell completely safe for work furry art. Not furry porn, safe for work furry art. Needless to say, I feel like Bandcamp planning to force artists to set up Stripe accounts en masse seems like it has the potential to create a lot of problems, and possibly even put certain parts of their user base at risk, doing unnecessary damage to a site that so many artists depend upon for their livelihood. There's already lots of furry artists on Bandcamp right now, some of which I've reviewed on this channel. If Stripe are already cracking down on people for selling furry art regardless of spiciness and inherently classifying them as adult content, wouldn't making those artists use Stripe for Bandcamp also be putting them at more risk to some degree? And obviously these kinds of right-wing censorship campaigns never end at just adult content. The goalpost of what that qualifies as is constantly moving, and right-wingers keep trying to expand it to whatever disagrees with their worldview. What if Stripe decide to follow the whims of other nutjob activist organizations and, say, target music that has explicit lyrics? Gotta protect those kids from hearing naughty words or those scary hip-hop stories that talk about black people dying. They could make a campaign to delist all hip-hop music from the site. Why not? Or how about, like, this beloved IDM record from the 2000s? It's famous for being 66 minutes and 6 seconds long and having other allusions to the devil in it. Might be Satan worshipping, can't have that. So let's get rid of that kind of stuff too. This may sound completely ridiculous and overblown, and these companies obviously haven't gone nearly that far yet. But if this past year of rising fascism across the entire world has proven anything, there is no such thing as too ridiculous. The chances of these kinds of things happening are not zero, and no one is truly safe under these kinds of policies. More options for payment methods on Bandcamp are all well and good, and in spite of all this, I'm really not even against the idea of Stripe integration into the site so long as it's optional and up for the user to decide, kinda like what Itchio do. I have actually been told by more than one person that they might prefer using Stripe over PayPal and that such an option would become more convenient for them based on the particular territory they live in. Obviously, Bandcamp relying on mostly PayPal has had its own problems. Some have argued that PayPal are even worse, and the chance that PayPal could make the same kind of damaging crackdowns on certain kinds of artists that Stripe already have is not zero either. But moving towards completely getting rid of PayPal integration and forcing this transition onto all artists on their platform without giving them any choice in the matter, I strongly suspect is going to cause more harm than good. Especially considering all the sensitive details you will need to input into their company in order to even sign up for an account in the first place. Of course, including a government ID, because of course that's a thing right now. At the end of the day, for all the very big problems PayPal has, it's still the most convenient option for lots of people to use, and sunsetting that functionality altogether, I suspect, is just going to drive more people away from the site. I, for one, would personally prefer to avoid making a Stripe account right now until we know for an absolute fact that queer creators are safe to use it, even if my Bandcamp checks are 14% smaller as a result. So, what do we do about all this? Well, first of all, I think we need to let the site runners of Bandcamp know how we feel about this decision. This is something I feel like they need to answer for. Although, I also need to make this abundantly clear, I absolutely do not endorse the idea that we as consumers should boycott platforms like Bandcamp and Itchio. That always seems to be the immediate knee-jerk reaction by the internet when a major platform does a bad thing that hurts their user base, to try and run away and go somewhere else. I'm not against the idea of artists, like, diversifying with other platforms. I've seen people spread around sites as possible alternatives. I think I saw one called Ampwall, although I have never looked into how viable that might be myself. But I think it's a better idea to make sure the platforms we already have remain safe to use instead of just bolting at the first sign of danger. Let's keep in mind, first of all, in order for any alternative sites to work at the kind of scale and accessibility that Bandcamp currently has, they're still going to have to interact with these major payment processors and will inevitably be putting themselves at risk for the exact same reasons. By the way, for anyone suggesting that people should be using crypto to pay for music, please shut the fuck up. But second of all, I do not believe avoiding purchasing music on Bandcamp at all is going to do anything to actually help the situation. Even if a possible boycott were to be organized at enough scale to, cut into Bandcamp's bottom lines, that would be doing a lot more harm to the artists who rely upon Bandcamp for income than it would to Bandcamp themselves. You can boycott a company like Spotify since their policies are actively harmful to artists. In fact, you should boycott Spotify because they just suck in general. Fucking piracy is a more effective way to support independent artists than Spotify right now, but that is a whole different conversation. Bandcamp is a very different beast, though. The people who still profit the most off of Bandcamp, by far, are not the people running the site or making these decisions of how the site works behind the scenes, but rather the artists themselves. So they're the first people who would be affected by a boycott. In my opinion, it's a lot more important for artists to keep getting the support they need in times like these, and so long as sites like Bandcamp and Itchio have the infrastructure to support these artists, which they still do, however flawed they may be, then I think that people should still be using them. I personally have no current plans to transition away from using Bandcamp myself. I don't believe they're the real enemy, and this plan they have hasn't completely been set into motion across the board yet, so they still have the opportunity to avoid shooting themselves in the foot. However, once again, I do think the particular way that Bandcamp is handling this transition right now is very concerning. It's certainly being done with the absolute worst possible timing, and is something I feel they do actively need to publicly answer for, and that will require people like you watching this to make a big stink about it and try to get their attention directly. The email to contact them is currently hidden from their site thanks to them getting a high volume of emails, but I believe you can still email them yourself at support_team@bandcamp.com and feedback@bandcamp.com. Source is just another Blue Sky post, so apologies if I got that wrong. But getting Bandcamp to possibly change course on this plan cannot be the final step either, because there's still going to be the much bigger issue of the payment processor companies who are causing this to even be such a big issue in the first place. Even if Bandcamp successfully dodges this particular bullet, The real enemy in this situation right now is companies like Stripe and PayPal and MasterCard and Visa grossly abusing their power to censor marginalized creators. And so long as these companies exert their power in this way, no digital marketplace is going to be truly safe. So what to do about these companies? Well, if you already follow me on Blue Sky and have been seeing me repost about this stuff for several weeks to a slightly browbeating degree, you probably already know it's coming. But I need to highlight that over this entire past month, ever since the whole Itchio situation started, there's been a fairly large campaign that's been organized to flood the customer service lines of all these Paypro companies. Special shout out to people like Anna Valens and Dieselbrain on Blue Sky, who I've seen promoting this the most and providing plenty of resources for people to keep helping out. The campaign, I think, has mostly been handled by people in the gaming sphere and the 18+ creators who are most affected by these policies, but censorship by payment processors has the potential to be our problem as music fans too, regardless of whether or not Bandcamp decide to reverse course on their new policy. So I would strongly urge music fans to join in on this calling campaign ourselves and express our own discontent with the way payment processors are conducting themselves. It's especially important that people less openly targeted by these policies are the ones who make a stink, since 18+ creators making a stink with these companies can just result in them getting targeted even more. Again, if PayPal detects that creators making money from 18+ content, then they get permanently banned. So this needs to be coming from the consumers instead. At the end of the day, even if this ends up not affecting music people that much, even if the censorship doesn't spread any further than it already has, which we obviously cannot count on, even in the best possible scenario, 18+ creators still deserve to be able to work safely and promote their own art too without having to need to worry about getting their entire livelihood stripped away from them, no pun intended. I'm an Aero Ace guy myself who has been lucky enough to have never have needed to interact directly with these kinds of 18+ spaces myself, and so I can play by the rules as it were, but adult content is not illegal yet. It's protected free speech, at least in the US, and if it isn't elsewhere, we need to be able to protect it. Censorship campaigns always go for pornographic or adjacent content first, because that's the easiest to vilify and the most embarrassing to defend. Too easy to just shut down that conversation as being held by gooners or whatever. But a threat to free speech is a threat to free speech, and payment processors should not be the arbiters of what is or isn't acceptable. So yes, there's multiple sites I have linked in the description, including yellat.money and stop-paypros.neocities.org, and some other infographics which can help guide you through calling the support lines of these companies. And when contacting Paypros, it is important to actually call and not email, since, from what I understand, they just filter emails out and ignore them. This may take a long time, a very long time. This campaign has already been going on for a full month as of recording this, and the payment processors haven't shown major signs of receding yet. But that's all the more reason to keep piling on the pressure. Just as those freaks at Collective Shout kept up the pressure on them before, we absolutely cannot let up on our end, and it's going to take a lot of work. But I do think the campaign has been working so far. These companies have already been feeling the pressure from the campaign. They've attempted to put out public statements, some of which I think are just outright lies, in order to get people to shut up. So we need to keep yelling at them until they actually do change their policies. It'll also help a lot if you call or email your representatives in the government of whatever place you live and tell them to push back on the many, age verification bills and or laws such as, UK's Online Safety Act, US's Kids Online Safety Act, among others. I believe I would not have the platform I currently have if not for the internet having this free and open infrastructure for random people to post whatever they want. So we need to ensure platforms like Bandcamp and Itchio that make up that infrastructure can continue to safely exist. So, in conclusion, to loosely paraphrase a passage once sampled by a certain above-mentioned beloved electronic outfit, now that the video is over and we have jointly exercised our constitutional rights, I would like to leave you with one very important thought. It would be wise to remember that the same people who would stop you from viewing an adult film may be back next year to complain about a book, or even a TV program, or maybe even stop you from listening to Boards of Canada if things get really extreme. If you can be told what you can see or read, or purchase, then it follows that you can be told what to say or think. Defend your constitutionally protected rights. No one else will do it for you. Thank you.